Drug abuse and addiction continues to remain one of the major issues affecting most youth in the world, and even people in the performing arts, especially musicians, comedians, TV personalities, name it. Most of them are found actually vulnerable to using drugs and are eventually addicted to it. Now, this morning, joining me, of course, together with Sarah, joining us on this discussion to discuss and get to understand why is it that artists all over the world, why is it that people fall vulnerable to drug abuse and addiction, is none other than Mr. Elbert Elwa Lewis. He's an addiction professional and the director focus of Recovery Uganda stroke Tranquil Homes. Good morning, sir, and thank you for joining us today on Sunrise at Sea.
Good morning. It's a pleasure being here, and good morning, viewers.
Well, Doctor, Sarah and I'm sure you did watch the first part of the Twitter jabs, and we're having an insight and a conversation into what makes people want to use drugs, or what is the process when it moves from being an abuse to an addiction.
Okay, first of all, I should correct you. I'm not a doctor. I'm an addiction professional. And then people get into the life of addiction for various reasons. Earlier on, you mentioned celebrities. One of the reasons is the pressure to remain in the limelight, social pressures, the pressure to remain relevant. For example, musicians. It is seldom, even on the international stage, to get somebody who just releases hit after hit, after hit. So there is the false belief that drugs give inspiration and are good for creativity. So many people try and use drugs for their own creative ability, which is actually false. And so I believe that's also part of the reason, those are some of the reasons they use. And then also most of these artists perform at night, in nightclubs, wherever they go, they are being offered this and that. And then also others just do it for the confidence to appear on stage. You'll see that there's so many artists that will come up with addictions to different substances, even substances you've not heard of. You've never seen the person drink alcohol or even smoke something, then they'll tell you, okay, this one has been injecting. Just because they feel they need something to boost their confidence, maybe their creative ability. Yeah, stuff like that.
I wanted to ask, what is an addiction professional? What does that mean?
An addiction professional. Okay. Recently, around the world, the American Psychiatry Association, America, and the World Health Organization have come up with a universal treatment curriculum.
Okay.
So that means around the world, we are using one curriculum to treat addiction.
Yes.
So it comes at different levels. So they have gone through their trainings that take place around the world. So once you undergo this training, UTC, and you acquire the first or second or third level, depending on whichever level, then you become a professional.
All right.
It doesn't stop you from having another background.
Okay.
Yeah.
Doctor, I need to understand, for very many people who are abusing drugs and are addicted to them, they go through a stage where they have the withdrawal syndrome symptom. What does that exactly mean?
Withdrawal symptoms, these are just the body's physical or psychological reaction, the physical reaction and psychology reaction to the absence of drugs. Because once our bodies get used to these drugs, we develop a dependence or an addiction. That means our systems are hooked. When we stop using them, our brains send a signal to the rest of the body saying, I need some more of what? Of that drug. So various drugs have different withdrawal symptoms. For example, people drink alcohol. When somebody hasn't taken alcohol, you'll see the person shaking.
Yes.
As soon as they take, they
calm down.
They stabilize. Yeah. Others go through hallucinations. People will tell you they're dreaming about dead bodies or they are drowning. And that's probably one of the reasons why people keep thinking they've been bewitched or this is a spiritual problem. But those are just hallucinations. Then for heroin, people complain of severe tummy ache, pain in the bones, running nose. Basic others get severe headache. Depends on the drug.
Okay. So how does the body get dependent on this drug or the substance?
Okay, you see.
Because it's not like what you wake up one day and you're now hooked. So how does it work?
When you start taking these substances, you'll start, for example, with one bottle of beer. Then before you know it, after some time, you're taking 2 or 3 bottles to get the same effect
As the one bottle.
as the one. So your body is building tolerance.
Yes.
As your body is building tolerance, something is taking place in your midbrain, and we call that the reward part of your brain, or the reward system. It gets to a point where that part of your brain is hijacked. Look at it this way: God created us with 4 biological functions that give us pleasure.
Yes.
That is sex, food, water, nurture, like when you graduate, when you wed.
Yes.
You know. So why these things give us pleasure is because that mid part of your brain, the reward center, releases a chemical that is called dopamine.
Yes.
That elates us, makes us feel good, and we want to do it again. Now, the most powerful of these functions is sex. Now, some of these drugs are actually 10 to 12 times more powerful than sex. Now, when the drugs hijack that system, that means the drugs take control of the flow of dopamine.
Yes.
So it gets to a point where our biological functions are causing the release of this same hormone, the same chemical, and also the drugs.
Yes.
Are causing the release of the same chemical. Now, our bodies were created to function with this normal amount of dopamine. So, coupled with what is being brought about by the drugs, the brain readjusts itself practically. It goes through a structural readjustment. And this new feature of the brain strictly depends on dopamine.
Yes.
You see, strictly depends on dopamine. So once you don't feed it with that dopamine, it sends you signals. Kind of like, give me my food, give me my food.
Yes.
Yeah.
You refuse me to call you doctor, so I won't call you doctor, I'll call you Albert. Albert, earlier on we're having a conversation and you told me the reason why you actually became an addiction professional and actually an advocate for this kind of thing is because you have had your own fair share of addiction and abuse. Take us through your story. How were you able to quit?
You know, alcohol had thrown some very... I was hooked onto alcohol and tobacco, and it had thrown some very lethal punches in my way. I mean, I struggled with school. After that, I was struggling with jobs. I struggled with relationships. I lost my friends. My fiancé threw me out. Family reached a point and also just, you know, distanced themselves.
And that's the thing.
Yeah, so I got to a point where I was practically destitute. But then I tried quitting on my own severally. Sometimes it would take me up, I would even go 1, 2, or 3 months without using. But I would find myself going back, and every time it was worse. So actually I was beginning to believe some stories from some relatives that I had been bewitched.
Yes.
Yeah, because I couldn't get it how I could not control this thing. But I met a friend who told me about rehabilitation, and that is how I ended up at a rehabilitation center. And for me, rehabilitation was an amazing journey. It answered all my questions. All of a sudden, I understood why I was hooked, why I thought the way I thought, why. Basically, it was an amazing journey. And from then on, I just didn't look back.
For many, their journey or their fight with drug abuse and addiction is not as smooth as yours. Did you go through some sort of stigma? Was there, because for most people, the stigma, the few people that have actually come out in Uganda to say that we have been going through this phase, you know, we have abused drugs, we are addicted to them. Very many people have come out to castigate them. That how are you doing this? How can it be you?
Honestly, my journey wasn't smooth. Maybe I just haven't gone into so much detail. you never survive stigma, especially in our society. There's a lot of stigma, right from within or amongst your family members to those outside your family setting. So the castigation goes on. It's not something you survive because, I mean, you're a disappointment.
True.
You know, people had all this hope in you and all that, and then you're killing that hope, you're injuring yourself, you're harming others with your behavior. So when they find that you cannot be helped, then they begin to caution others against you and against behavior such as yours.
Yes.
And that is the stigma.
Yes.
Don't be like Albert. You know.
And yet that is not helping. It's
That's not
actually very
helping.
detrimental because it
Exactly.
makes the person who is struggling with, with the substance abuse or addiction to even just drown in it more because you're just making the person a lot more depressed. So how about relapse? How can people who are struggling, with drug addiction prevent themselves from relapsing? What do they have to do?
No, relapse, first of all, for example, when you go through treatment, through the rehab process,
Yes.
you're equipped with coping skills.
What kind of coping skills?
Number one is you have to recognize your triggers.
Oh.
You have to recognize your
So,
triggers.
so what are the triggers? The things that are causing you to drink alcohol?
That remind you about use or force you to use. Triggers come in form of people, places, and things.
Okay.
You know, the people remind you of use, the things that remind you of use, the places that remind you of use. But that is this other bit, that's the physical bit. But then there's the emotional bit.
Yes.
You have to watch also your emotions because addiction is actually an emotional disease, you can say. Anger. And that's why in rehab you go through anger management so that you're able to deal with your anger.
Yes.
Your resentments, you manage like your anxiety and stuff like that. So you have to be able to recognize your trigger, both your emotional and other triggers, physical triggers. Yeah.
All right, that is quite interesting. And because a report did say that drug abuse is one of the reasons as to why a lot of people end up committing suicide. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I do.
And why is that so?
Do
people end up killing themselves or committing suicide because they are aware of their problem, or it is something that just catalyzes their feeling of wanting to just, end their lives?
Okay, I usually look at that from two angles. One is a life of addiction is a very ugly place for anyone to be. Contrary to what people think, that this person enjoys that lifestyle. Most people in there are unhappy, they are depressed, and they're full of shame and guilt, and very few people can actually look at themselves in the mirror and recognize themselves.
Yeah.
So this usually breeds feelings of depression.
Yes.
Being hopeless is a very depressing state.
Yes.
So it's these feelings of depression that bring about the suicidal ideations. Then you see people taking that negative step of trying to end their lives or end their lives. Then the second one, I believe this, and this is Albert, that
Yes, believes this.
not everyone who commits suicide actually had originally intended to go through with it. Many a time it's a cry for attention.
A cry for attention?
Yeah.
For very many people.
Yes, it's a cry. You need the help. But you see, addiction is, because you're trying to protect yourself, you're empty. You put up so many defense mechanisms, and one of them is pride.
Yes.
You don't want people to see how damaged you are.
Yes.
And that is why in most cases people try to resist help, because it exposes your vulnerability. Very few people are courageous enough to accept, how bad it is. So once you're in that state, you want to do something drastic so that these people really see you dying. And some people just
end up just going all the way because
yeah.
nobody has come to you know, to stop it,
or they did not know when to stop.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So those are the two reasons. The second is crying for attention, and the first is actually the feeling of hopelessness, the depression that comes with it.
But then that would support the norm when people say the only reason you're doing drugs is because you want our attention or you want my attention and stuff like that.
No, those are two very different things, because no one exactly self-harms in order to mess up another person. In the beginning, it might seem that way, especially for young people. Mom has messed me up, I'm going to show her. I know she gets angry when I drink.
Yes.
Then I go and drink. That happens at that point. But now when the addiction sets in, addiction is basically continuing use despite harmful consequences.
Yes.
You wake up in a prison, you've broken a leg, even whether you've been stabbed, you'll find somebody lighting a cigarette or opening a sachet
Yes.
while on the hospital bed.
Yes.
Because now the disease has taken a life of its own. It's actually a disease, you know, a disease of the brain. So it's that at that point, it's no longer a cry for attention or anything. It's a disease, it's taken on a life of its own, and you absolutely have no control. A simple definition for addiction is loss of control.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have talked about how you can get addicted and how you also know that you're starting to get addicted. But you just mentioned that people who are struggling with addiction are quite egotistic. They don't want to show that people are vulnerable. How can we identify our loved ones or people in society that are struggling with addiction, and how can we support them?
Okay, yeah, first of all, let me just correct something there. Not many people actually know that they're getting addicted.
Okay.
Because till that point, most people always think they can pull out.
Yes.
Yeah, they think they have it
In themselves,
yeah,
yes.
they have it in check or under control. But how you recognize, for example, as a family, once you see somebody has fallen off routine, there's a problem. These people no longer
They don't mingle.
They don't mingle. They don't join you during meals. They are no longer part of family outings.
Yes.
They are sleeping most of the time.
Yes.
You know, even the physical appearance. There's something that has changed. You know, the responsibility really drops, both personal responsibility and responsibility towards others. You notice some of the maladaptive behavior, the behavior that is causing problems within the family, always pointing to one person. And then there is the financial bit. If the person is a dependent in the family, they're always asking for money.
Yes.
Constant.
Yes.
Exactly, they always have excuse after excuse. If the person is the breadwinner, then their responsibility towards the family reduces. However, they are also what we call functional addicts.
Addicts, yes.
These ones will remain responsible.
You can never tell.
Exactly. It's only the people within the family that tell in most cases. They provide for their family, their society people. You might go tell the neighbor that Albert has a problem, and they say, no, this is responsible, this is amiable and everything. But usually with this functional ability, the center starts giving in around the age of 40, you know? Because even addiction at whatever stage has a ceiling. Functionality also has a ceiling. So at that point you start losing it probably at work, you know? The cracks start showing, the family relationships start disintegrating, and it usually takes on this kind of pattern. Number one, the job goes. Then number two, the family disintegrates. Probably the wife moves with the kids, or the husband moves with the kids. Then that is when the depression sets in. And in a very short time, you cannot recognize this person.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Albert, time is not our best ally, but as we wrap up, and based on the fact that you're actually coming from Focus on Recovery Uganda, what initiatives do you take to actually help some of these people that are going through drug abuse and drug addiction?
Okay, we run two treatment facilities, one at Kajansi and one in Bwebaja. And that's for inpatient, and one outpatient. At Bina. We admit people for treatment. We have a schools program where for prevention drives, where we talk to students in schools. We have essay writing competitions in primary schools, geared towards elevating the understanding of substance use disorders. Basically, that's addiction. We have an annual walk that is geared towards awareness. And we are part of many initiatives by World Health Organization, Ministry of Health, Uganda Alcohol Policy Alliance, and all these other organizations that are geared towards fighting the disease. We're also part of Addiction Prevention and Rehabilitative Association of Uganda, a fast-growing network of organizations that are in treatment. And we are trying to streamline our activities so that we provide the most professional help towards those that need treatment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for allowing and giving us your time to educate us and give us more insight when it comes to drug abuse and addiction.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. And that wraps up the conversation that we had for you today on the Twitter Jabs. With me was Albert. Actually, he's an addiction professional. So actually, if you like more help, you can actually head out to him or even get to him. You know, you can actually go to my Twitter platform at Shivan_Auma90 and I will be able to share the details about him. Up next is Kira Natozo with an interesting discussion on menstrual disorders. So you do not want to miss that.